Aaron Preston Raines was born on August 3, 1981, to Thomas and Barbara Raines. He was the youngest of 6 children, growing up in Cincinnati, Ohio, where he was a 4th-grade student known for his sweet nature, helpful attitude, and love of playing outside. He had a trusting and kind spirit, which made what happened to him all the more heartbreaking. On the afternoon of May 11, 1992, when 10-year-old Aaron failed to return home from school, his family quickly grew concerned. After being reported missing, his body was sadly discovered in the basement of an abandoned building on West 8th Street in Lower Price Hill. He had been tied up, brutally beaten, and left in a horrifying condition. Police quickly zeroed in on and arrested 2 men by the names of Michael Bias and Daryl Gum, who admitted to luring Aaron into the building under the pretense of paying him to help collect scrap metal. Once inside, they led him into the dark basement where they attempted to sexually assault him. Aaron resisted, and the men responded with unrelenting violence, beating him with boards, a metal pipe, and a large rock until he was dead. Wounds on his head matched the pipe found nearby. He was then left tied up on the basement floor. Both men were convicted of murder, kidnapping, and attempted sexual assault, and sentenced to death. But in the years that followed, their convictions were overturned after federal courts ruled they had not received fair trials. The 6th Circuit Court of Appeals determined that both men were intellectually disabled, making them ineligible for execution, and cited numerous issues with the original trials, including withheld evidence and hearsay testimony. The rulings devastated Aaron's family and outraged many in the community. For more than 2 decades, Barbara Raines and her children continued to attend hearings, determined to see justice for Aaron's murder. In 2015, after serving 23 years behind bars, Michael Bias accepted a plea deal and pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter, kidnapping, attempted sexual assault, and aggravated burglary. He was then sentenced to 35 years in prison. With credit for time served, he will likely be released around 2035. He will then serve 5 years of probation and be registered as a sex offender for 10 years following his release. The Lower Price Hill Community Council, at the time of Aaron's murder, had spent years warning the city that the abandoned buildings in the area were dangerous. After Aaron's death, the building where he was killed was torn down, and a nearby lot became a memorial garden. More than 30 years later, the pain of Aaron's loss hasn't faded. He was a bright, loving child with his whole life ahead of him. For those who knew him and those who have come to know his story, the ache remains, along with the belief that the justice system still owes Aaron and his family the accountability they deserve. As for Daryl Gum, he remains in prison serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Christy Giles was a 24-year-old model from Alabama with a bold, adventurous spirit and a growing passion for interior design. Her friend, Hilda Marcela Cabrales-Arzola, was a 26-year-old architect from Mexico, a cum laude graduate who had just moved to Los Angeles to begin her dream job in design. The 2 women were building exciting new lives for themselves in the city when a single night out changed everything. On November 12, 2021, Christy and Hilda began their evening at an art exhibit in Soho House in West Hollywood. They later made their way to a warehouse party in East LA to see one of their favorite DJs. Photos and social media clips from that night captured them dancing in the VIP section, laughing and enjoying themselves. They were later seen with 42-year-old David Pearce, a self-proclaimed Hollywood producer, his roommate, 45-year-old actor Brant Osborne, and another man named Michael Ansbach. Around 5:30 a.m., Christy texted Hilda, "Let's go." Hilda responded, "I'll call an Uber 10 minutes away." But when the Uber arrived, neither of the women came out. The driver left after waiting a few minutes. That was the last message Christy ever sent. Later that day, Christy's husband, Jan Cilliers, noticed her location was now at the Southern California Hospital in Culver City. Alarmed, he reached out to Christy's parents in Alabama and to the friend who had gone out with the women earlier that night. However, no one could reach Christy or Hilda. Jan left San Francisco and rushed back to LA, determined to find out what had happened. When hospital staff contacted Christy's parents, they delivered devastating news. Christy had been dropped off at the hospital by two men in masks, hats, and hoodies, driving a black Prius with no license plates. She was already dead when she arrived. It felt like she had been discarded like garbage, her mother later said through tears. But even worse, no one knew where Hilda was. Using phone location data shared with Hilda's friend, Yun and the friend realized that Hilda was still at the same unknown address in West LA where Christy's phone had earlier pinged. That address belonged to David Pearce. Later that same day, Hilda was found outside Kaiser Permanente West Los Angeles Medical Center, unconscious and in critical condition. She had been dropped off roughly 90 minutes after Christy was. Hilda's family quickly flew in from Mexico, hoping for a miracle. Her parents sat by her bedside, devastated but holding on to hope. Tragically, after 11 days in a coma, Hilda passed away on November 24, 2021, just one day before her 27th birthday. Toxicology reports revealed both women had been given a deadly combination of drugs. Christy's system contained fentanyl, cocaine, ketamine, and GHB, the so-called date rape drug. Hilda's toxicology report showed cocaine, ecstasy, and fentanyl. The Los Angeles County Medical Examiner ruled both deaths homicides caused by drug-facilitated overdoses. Jan Cilliers refused to rest until he got answers. Using Christy's laptop, he accessed her text messages and pieced together the final hours of her life. He reached out to the event photographer from the warehouse party, who provided surveillance images showing Christy and Hilda leaving with Pearce and his friends. Other footage would later confirm that they were taken to Pearce's Beverly Hills apartment, an apartment that would become the site of a horrific betrayal. Investigators determined that within about 35 minutes of arriving at Pearce's apartment, Hilda tried to summon a rideshare to leave, but neither woman left. Nearly 11 hours later, Pearce was seen carrying Christy's lifeless body out of the apartment. An hour and a half later, he carried Hilda out as well. They were each dumped outside different hospitals. As police dug deeper, they uncovered an alarming history. Pearce had a long trail of sexual assault allegations going back to 2007. 7 women came forward with harrowing stories of drug-facilitated sexual and violent assaults and trauma at his hands. Their courage would help bring the case to court. On July 6, 2022, nearly 8 months after the deaths, Pearce was charged with 2 counts of murder and 7 counts of sexual assault involving 7 different victims. His roommate, Brent Osborne, was charged with 2 counts of accessory after the fact. Outside of court, Osborne insisted he was innocent and declined to comment further. At trial, the jury heard the stories of the 7 women who had survived Pearce's abuse. Their testimony, combined with forensic evidence, including Pearce's DNA found under Hilda's fingernails, painted a chilling picture of a man who had preyed on women for years. On February 4, 2025, justice finally caught up to him. David Pearce was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of Christy and Hilda. He was also convicted of 3 counts of forcible sexual assault, 1 count of sexual penetration by force, 1 count of sexual assault of an unconscious woman, 1 count of sodomy by force, and 1 count of sexual penetration by foreign object. Pearce faces 148 years to life in prison and will be required to register as a sex offender for life. His sentencing was scheduled for March 13, 2025, but postponed after Pearce fired his attorney and hired new legal representation. They now plan to file a motion for a new trial. If the motion is denied on June 30, 2025, the sentencing will take place afterward. As for Osborne, the jury couldn't reach a unanimous verdict, and the judge declared a mistrial. A hearing is scheduled to determine if he will face a retrial. Meanwhile, he remains out on bond. In the wake of their losses, the families of Christy and Hilda have turned their grief into action. Christy's husband, Yun, scattered her ashes in their favorite places. Her parents held a memorial service in Alabama, surrounded by loved ones and memories. Hilda's family honored her life in Mexico, lighting candles and lanterns at her favorite park, playing her favorite music, and sharing her favorite cake. Also, her organs were donated, helping others live on. Their families continued to advocate for women's safety, encouraging everyone to share their locations with loved ones, trust their instincts, and never stop fighting for justice. Gabrielle Miranda Bechen, who went by Gabby, was born on February 27, 1994, in Morgantown, West Virginia. Gabby had just completed 6th grade at Bobtown Elementary School. She was bright, kind, and loved by everyone who knew her. She adored animals, especially her pet rabbit and her St. Bernard, and had been part of the school chorus and spelling bee. Her future was full of promise until a horrible tragedy occurred during the summer of 2006. On the morning of June 13th, 12-year-old Gabby left her home in Greensboro, Pennsylvania, for what was supposed to be a short ride on her four-wheeler, something she often did. She always wore her helmet and was careful, usually visiting neighbors nearby, but that morning she never came back. When Gabby didn't return, her mother grew concerned and called her father. Together, they searched the area around their rural trailer, but when there was no sign of her or her ATV, they called the police. What followed was a massive search effort involving local law enforcement, the FBI, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and volunteers from the community. On June 17th, 5 days after she vanished, searchers made a heartbreaking discovery. Her four-wheeler was found partially buried under manure on a nearby horse farm, about 1.5 miles from her home. Investigators turned their attention to the farm's caretaker, 48-year-old Jeffrey Robert Martin. When questioned, he eventually led police to her body, which had been buried in a shallow grave not far from where the ATV was found. Cadaver dogs helped confirm the location early the next morning. Martin initially confessed to strangling Gabby after sexually assaulting her. He told police she had threatened to tell her parents and that he panicked. He said he used a backhoe to dig her grave and tried to hide the ATV. Later, he recanted and attempted to blame someone else for the murder. In May 2008, after a 6-day trial, a jury found Martin guilty of first-degree murder, sexual assault, aggravated indecent assault, and other charges. The next day, he was sentenced to death. His conviction and sentence were upheld by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court in 2014, and he was placed on death row at SCI Phoenix, a state prison in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. In 2016, the Department of Corrections issued a notice of execution for Martin, but then Governor Tom Wolf declined to sign the death warrant. That's because Pennsylvania has had a moratorium on executions since 2015. A moratorium is a temporary halt, in this case, a decision by the governor to stop carrying out the death penalty, even though it remains legal. Death sentences can still be imposed by courts, but the state does not move forward with executions. However, Pennsylvania hasn't executed an inmate since 1999 and doesn't have plans to change that anytime soon. So while Jeffrey Robert Martin was sentenced to death, that sentence remains on hold. He is still alive and incarcerated, with no current timeline for execution. But regardless of what happens legally, Gabby Bechen's memory lives on. Her light, her kindness, and her love for animals continue to be remembered by the people who loved her most. Kamille Dontrese McKinney, who was known as Cupcake, was born on April 22, 2016, and lived in Birmingham, Alabama. At just 3 years old, she was full of life, bright, joyful, and loved by her family. But on the evening of October 12, 2019, that life was taken in an unthinkable act of cruelty. That night, Kamille was attending an outdoor birthday party with her family in the Tom Brown Village public housing community off 41st Place North. Witnesses saw a man and woman in an SUV handing out candy to children. One child reported seeing Kamille inside the SUV crying. She had sadly been lured away from the gathering and abducted. Surveillance footage later showed Patrick Devon Stallworth purchasing candy at a nearby store shortly before the abduction. His Toyota SUV, seen in that footage, was later impounded. The day after Kamille vanished, investigators found disturbing images of inappropriate child material on Stallworth's phone, though none of the images were of Kamille. He was initially released on a $500,000 bond, but taken back into custody shortly afterward. Derek Irisha Brown, Stallworth's girlfriend, was also arrested and held on a prior kidnapping charge involving her own children. A massive search effort unfolded over the following days, with the community and law enforcement working tirelessly. Tragically, 10 days after Kamille disappeared, her remains were found in a Sandtech dumpster at a landfill near Warrior, Alabama, about 20 miles from Birmingham. The dumpster had been picked up from the Woodside condominiums near Stallworth's apartment. An autopsy revealed that Kamille had methamphetamine and trazodone, a sedative, in her system. Prosecutors stated that the drugs were administered to make her sleepy and not merely present due to environmental exposure. Her cause of death was ultimately ruled as asphyxiation. According to investigators, Stallworth and Brown gave her the drugs, and Stallworth later accused Brown of placing her hand over Kamille's nose and mouth, ultimately killing her. Evidence found in Stallworth's apartment included a plastic mattress cover with a blood stain containing DNA from Stallworth, Brown, and Kamille. At a preliminary hearing, a judge ruled there was enough evidence to bind the case over to a grand jury. In December 2019, both Stallworth and Brown were indicted for capital murder of a child under 14 and capital murder during a kidnapping. Stallworth pleaded not guilty, while Brown entered a plea of not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. In July 2020, the pair were also indicted on federal charges of kidnapping and conspiracy and were tried separately in federal court in late 2022. The juries in both cases found that the kidnapping directly led to Kamille's death, which triggered a sentencing enhancement mandating life in prison without the possibility of parole. In March 2023, both Stallworth and Brown were sentenced to life in prison. Stallworth showed no emotion and declined to speak at his sentencing. Brown, on the other hand, apologized to the court and Kamille's family, stating that she would change the outcome if she could. However, April Thomas, Kamille's mother, expressed her heartbreak through a statement read in court, saying, "Life and death will never be enough for what you did." Although both Stallworth and Brown were already sentenced to life in prison without parole, the state of Alabama is still pursuing capital murder charges against them, with the death penalty as a possible sentence. The delays are due to legal procedures and mental competency reviews, which must be resolved before the trials can move forward. In early 2024, Brown underwent several mental health evaluations, including an Atkins evaluation to determine if she's mentally fit to face the death penalty. She is currently committed to a mental health facility, and no new trial date has been set. We are now midway through 2025, and while their federal trial dates have not been set, at least they are in custody and can never hurt another innocent person again. Reynaldo Javier Rivera was born on September 13, 1963, in Madrid, Spain. He spent much of his early life in Europe before moving to the United States, eventually settling in the Augusta area, a region that stretches across Georgia and South Carolina. He served in the U.S. Navy, held steady jobs, and appeared to be a devoted husband and father, but behind that calm, respectable image was a violent predator. Between 1999 and 2000, Rivera terrorized the community. 5 young women were either killed or left forever changed by his actions. And as the investigation unfolded, it became clear this man had been hiding in plain sight. The nightmare began on June 29, 1999, when a 17-year-old girl in Augusta was abducted and sexually assaulted. Somehow, she survived. Her courage in escaping and coming forward gave police the first thread that would later unravel Rivera's secret life. Then, on July 17, 1999, 17-year-old Melissa Faye Dingus disappeared in Graniteville, South Carolina, after an argument with her boyfriend. For more than a year, her family waited and hoped. That hope was destroyed in October 2000 when Rivera, already in custody, led investigators to her skeletal remains near I-20 in Georgia. A few months after Melissa vanished, another 17-year-old girl, Tiffany Sharice Wilson, went missing. She had left her North Augusta home to run errands with her infant daughter, Caitlin. Hours later, Caitlin was found abandoned in her car seat at a Georgia welcome center, her mother nowhere to be found. Weeks passed, then on December 30th, Tiffany's body was discovered in the woods. She had been sexually assaulted and stabbed to death. Rivera would later admit to attacking her with her baby still inside his van. On June 19, 2000, Tabitha Lee Bosdale, also just 17, left for summer school and never arrived. Born in Augusta and known for her bright spirit, Tabitha was working as a telemarketer and attending high school. Months later, her remains were found and identified. Then came 21-year-old Army Sergeant Marnie Marie Glista. She was a dedicated soldier who had lived all over the world and was currently a military intelligence analyst stationed at Fort Gordon. On September 5, 2000, Marnie was viciously attacked in her own home. Her husband found her barely clinging to life. Sadly, she died 5 days later, and her murder became the focal point of the death penalty case against Rivera. But Rivera wasn't finished. On October 10, 2000, he lured 18-year-old Christy Lee Barton with the promise of a modeling opportunity. He then sexually assaulted her and stabbed her multiple times in the neck, nearly decapitating her, but thankfully Christy Lee survived. She somehow found the strength to describe her attacker in detail, leading to a composite sketch that would finally bring Rivera down. Just days later, he was discovered in a South Carolina motel room, having attempted suicide by slashing his wrist and overdosing on Tylenol. He survived, and so did the evidence. In custody, Rivera confessed in chilling detail. He described the murders of Melissa Dingus, Tiffany Wilson, Tabitha Bosdale, and Sergeant Glista. He even took police to their burial sites, and DNA and forensic evidence backed up every word. In 2004, he was tried for Marnie Glista's murder. The jury heard from survivors, saw his confessions, and reviewed his disturbing handwritten fantasies. They found him guilty and sentenced him to death, along with multiple life sentences. Rivera, now 61, has not been executed and remains on death row at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification State Prison. He has spent the last 2 decades filing appeal after appeal, claiming his confession was false, that his lawyers failed him, and even that he may be innocent in some of the murders he had once so clearly confessed to. In March 2025, a federal judge finally shut down those arguments. U.S. District Judge J. Randall Hall denied Rivera's request for an appeal, a writ of habeas corpus, and an evidentiary hearing. In his ruling, he rejected claims of prosecutor misconduct and ineffective counsel. Rivera's conviction and sentence still stand, yet even now he's asked for that ruling to be reconsidered. His legal team has even claimed that prosecutors hid a recorded interview taken just after his arrest, an interview they initially said didn't exist. The recording was later found in a former detective's apartment. But the court dismissed Rivera's argument, noting that he had confessed again and again, even requesting the death penalty in court and threatening to return years later with a better lawyer to escape justice. The courtroom was packed with victims' families. Kim Meek, Tiffany Wilson's aunt, was among them. She remembers how excited Tiffany had been that day, taking Caitlin to get her picture with Santa. The pain of Rivera's continued appeals has only added to their grief. He doesn't have the right to say he didn't kill her, she said, when he clearly confessed that he did. And what about Christy Lee Barton? She was only 18 when she was attacked. The woman who helped stop a serial killer, but no one ever really helped her. After surviving Rivera's brutal assault, Christy Lee never received the long-term support she desperately needed. No therapy, no trauma counseling. She was left to fend for herself. In 2011, at age 28, she was arrested in a drug sting, and the downward spiral didn't end there. On March 28, 2025, she was arrested again in Augusta for disorderly conduct. She struggled with the law, with addiction, and with loss. She lost 2 family members to overdoses. One was her brother Andy, and the other was her daughter who died in 2022. She spent years battling trauma, grief, and isolation, and yet, without her, Rivera may never have been caught.